going to present to you the progress that I've made with regulation devices spring 2020. And so the motivation for the project is that in fast-paced situations, it is difficult to juggle multiple goals and thoughts at once. And so a user's goals and sub-goals may change constantly and complicate people's ability to self-monitor as well as self-correct their behavior in order to achieve their goals. And regulation devices are aimed to help individuals self-regulate behaviors in the moment in order to best achieve their goals. Existing means of goal tracking aren't flexible and adaptable, and thus are mentally straining to apply to varying and changing goals of these situations. And one such example that we're currently focused on is to how to help mentors and mentees achieve their goals in weekly SIG meetings and using these in-the-moment regulations. So SIG meetings in our HCCI lab helps independent undergraduate researchers better plan their work. And so in the 3 phases of this meeting, the mentor and mentee communicate the project progress, risk, and plan for next steps. And the difficulty of the fact that mentors and mentees each have separate goals during each of the phases makes it difficult to regulate their behavior and having to juggle all of these their own goals as well as the other person's goals. And so if the goals of SIGs aren't met, there's consequences such as the mentees risk going too in depth in their articulation and wasting time, and in turn mentee risks wasting time in their sprint after the SIG meeting because they didn't cover enough of what their most important risk is. And so the key contributions I've made this quarter include a need finding and follow-ups in order to understand the structure and variation among SIGs, in order to then understand where to intervene, as well as identify common difficulties within articulation. And so once these results have identified these common difficulties that I'll discuss in the next few slides, I've created a guide to identify root cause behaviors during these difficulties so that I can then pinpoint which behaviors require in-the-moment regulation, which then informs the design. Needfinding design, I decided to conduct the first need finding with my status update. And so the goal of this first need finding was to find the challenges of managing and reflecting SIG, as well as how SIG structures vary between teams and how does that affect the SIG goals that they're trying to achieve. Additionally, I wanted to investigate what are the difficulties about articulation. And so during the status update, I asked them to reflect upon their last SIG, answer questions about how their SIG structures varied, as well as their goals in SIG, their accomplishments, missed topics, and troubles during articulation. In addition, I asked them about the sources of difficulties in managing SIG in general. And so the follow-ups, the goal of that was so that to focus on articulation, as it was the most prevalent issue in the responses that I did get in the first status update. And so I wanted to investigate why teams chose to allocate different amounts of time for articulation, what caused longer times if they weren't desired, and how does the difficulties and structures affect mentee and mentor's ability to reach their own individual SIG goals. So from that, some of the results that I did get was that SIGs were spending too much time articulating blockers and progress to partner and to their SIG heads, and people had a hard time deciding on their biggest blockers. In addition, I found that in next steps that they were discussing in SIG may have concerns that were unaddressed or generally not well painted. However, these tend to not significantly affect the progress of their sprint in the next week, which was figured out in the follow-ups. Additionally, there was a disconnect between mentor and mentee that causes the lack of satisfaction. And so in the follow-ups, what I found out was that all the SIGs have the common goals of aligning progress, identifying risks, and generating good planning skills and as well as plans. So the differences are in their method and timing. Some teams had distributed updates, while others concentrated it onto their SIG, which cause them to take longer. And these differences are due to the different work styles, and consequently, there's no universal time management systems that can be forced upon each team. And so, in the follow up, I investigated further into articulation, and I found that communication about progress between partners and SIG heads that are transparent led to better alignment on risks. Additionally, students have a hard time specifying practical risks in relation to the Canvas sections. Also, confusion about risks force mentees to tell a story way too detailed that is necessary for their SIG. And it is usually resolved by interjections from the mentors to relate back to the Canvas section. But they have difficulty knowing whether the mentee would actually get to this Canvas and get past the details. And so additional work from the new Needfinding is needed to identify specific behaviors to target with the design. However, there is a preliminary design argument that I have in place. And so the first desired outcome is that mentors properly allocate time based on their needs for risks and planning. However, obstacles are that mentees get caught up in risk articulation because they become unaware of the time. And since the structures of the SIGs vary so much, the solution will be a self-triggered reflection event to bring mentor and mentee's attention to timing in order to have them reflect and assess whether this is the amount of time that I want to spend. And this allows for flexibility as well as attention to time. So the second desired outcome is that mentors interject at appropriate points to keep risk articulation at a high conceptual level as well as being relevant to the Canvas. The obstacle to that is that mentors don't know when they've gone off track, the mentees have gone off track, and when they should intervene. And so the action points that will be captured in the next Needfinding will be alerted to the mentor so that they can interject when necessary to get them back on track. And that brings us to the next Needfinding that I've created a guide for. So several of the pain points have been identified from the status update Needfinding. Those include difficulty maintaining a high level of detail during risk articulation, directing the focus of risk articulation to its importance in relation to the Canvas. They provide a guideline for understanding the pain points. However, it did not provide specific root causes that can then inform the design argument. The goals during SIG are well established. The mentor's goals are to understand the risk, assess flaws in their risks, and guide mentees to self-correct their risks. And the mentees' goals are to communicate and revise their risks and come with an understanding of the planning needed for next step. However, the understanding of sub-goals is limited and needs to be explored further in interviews. And in this instance, sub-goals are defined as smaller goals that can divide a major aforementioned SIG goal to have concrete actions and behaviors. In addition, identified pain points of articulation cannot be traced back to any specific sub-goal thought or interaction, so that was going to be explored with the next Needfinding. And to summarize, the next Needfinding's goal is to understand the set of goals and sub-goals, identify the sequence of independent thoughts and interactions for each sub-goal, as well as grasp the mentor and mentee's independent understanding and reflection upon these interactions and sub-goals, as well as surface any common root causes in these sub-goals that cause stagnation in risk identification and communication. And so the Needfinding would take the form of interviews with mentors and mentees before and after SIG meetings, as well as sitting in during their SIG meetings to pinpoint specific behaviors to talk about in the interviews. And so some of the key takeaways from this quarter of research include that through Needfinding, I spliced down the focus into articulation, since timing and management was varied across different SIGs, which achieve their goals differently. Needfinding has identified common struggles during articulation to relate the information back to the Canvas view and to maintain a high level of detail, trying to explain their risks. And in addition, common struggles identified in the first Needfinding are then informing the new Needfindings in order to guide to specific action items where regulation can be fostered. This then allows identification of behaviors that design can tackle. And that concludes my video. Thank you for watching, and I hope this was informative.